I started these conversations to discuss leadership, mentorship, growth, and so much more from voices you may not have heard from before. I hope the conversations inspire you, motivate you, and give you something to think about. This is Leadership in Colour from myself, Shezak Pal, supported and powered by me. Welcome to Leadership in Colour. Really pleased to have my pal, your pal, Nav Pal, join the episode. Hey Nav, sorry about that. I just had to. It was too easy. You know, the dad in me wouldn't allow me to not do that terrible introduction. So how about you do a better introduction than what I just did?
It's all right. I get it. Yeah, my name is Nav. My surname is Pal, so I am your pal. And I am a podcaster by job and in the evenings as well.
Very good, very good. And your podcasting by job is with Haymarket, and then you've got your own podcast as well, right?
Yep.
Okay, right. Okay, fantastic. So first question is always tell me about your name. So we got through the PAL bit, although it'd be interesting to know where that comes from too. But what does NAV mean? What's NAV
Uh,
short for?
so Nav is short for Nav Deep, and I believe that means the first light lit by God.
Wow.
I think it's a Punjabi name. And Pal, I don't know what that means. I just got it from my dad. And I also have my middle name is Kaur. So everyone who's born Sikh, if you're a female, you have Kaur as a middle name, and if you're male, you have Singh as a middle name.
Okay, right. So amazing name. I guess ironic that you're the last. Either way, beautiful name. So tell me about your day job.
So I'm a podcast studio manager at Haymarket Media Group, and I look after a portfolio of around 16 different podcasts. I have a team of producers that I work with, and I deal with the strategy, the production, and all of that sort of thing with new podcasts, existing podcasts. And yeah, we look after the entire B2B portfolio.
And would there be any podcasts there that perhaps the audience would be familiar with?
Yes, we do Management Today's leadership lessons, but we also cover a wide range of titles. So we do ENDS Report, which is environmental data services. We do planning regulation, partnerships. We also do PR Week and campaign. Yeah, lots of different ones, plus medical titles. And we're working on a secret new launch at the moment as well.
Come on, you can give us a little bit of information on it.
Well, the code name for it is Rocket Man.
Rocket Man. Oh, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Okay, well, I'm looking forward to hearing about that one. Yeah, you're right. Those podcasts are definitely podcasts that people will be familiar with. And they're all, as you say, B2B industry specific ones. And then you've got your own podcast, which I want to
Yeah.
come to in a bit. But before I get to your podcast, which I'm super excited to talk about, mostly because you've just allowed me to talk about that. So there was to let the audience in. I've been wanting to talk about this podcast for a while. I've been a listener since day dot. It's a great podcast. But yeah, before we get onto that, I would love to know about your journey into the industry, because as I understand it, really, you should be like a roller coaster engineer.
Yeah, so I started working out of sixth form. While I was still working in sixth form, actually, I also worked weekends at Thorpe Park, and I was a ride operator. I was part of the opening crew for Darren Brown's Ghost Train. If you tried going in 2016 and you were told it was closed, I'm sorry, it was nothing to do with me. I dealt with all of the angry guests then. I'm not dealing with it now. It was a really fun sort of weekend job to do as a teenager. And then yeah, I kind of realized I needed a proper job that wasn't, an hourly rate. And I got myself an apprenticeship at Haymarket. So I've been there nearly 9 years now. And I started off as a publishing apprentice. So I was doing invoices and sort of business administration. And then I did a year of maternity cover for directories production. So I was making sort of directories for a few of the different brands and doing print production. And then I helped with a relaunch of a brand which was in the architecture and interior design space. And then I sort of became part of that editorial team and was working there as like a reporter. And then during the pandemic, so in 2020, kind of said to my manager, I'm getting a bit bored of, the normal day to day. Why don't we start a podcast? And at the time, we had just launched our Women in Architecture Award. And at the time, we had just launched our Women in Architecture Award scheme. And I thought a good way to do a podcast would be to do a podcast based on women in architecture to sort of give them, a spotlight in a very male dominated industry. And so we launched Women Build, and then we started getting messages from men saying, "Hey, we want to come on board." And we were just like, "Hey, it's Women Build." So we launched a second podcast, which was World Build, which meant that, we could start interviewing male architects as well. And yeah, it did really well. And then Haymarket built a studio in the office space. And I then went on to start managing that and looking after all of the B2B podcasts.
It's very entrepreneurial, right? To be able to go from essentially doing a job that you're not really that keen on, thinking, hey, look, this is something that, or maybe you're not keen on, but you're getting a little bit bored of, is perhaps a better way to frame it. And then to say, well, instead of me leaving, is there something I can do here first? Because most people would just look at the job ads and move on.
Mm.
What was it that made you decide to put this proposal forward?
Well, I did GCSE music, and so I already knew how to sort of edit audio and stuff like that. And we had done a podcasting like workshop, like training day before we went into lockdown. And from that moment, I was just like, oh, yeah, this is really, really cool. I really want to get into it. So I knew, based on the fact that they had done a training day, that there was interest from the company to start getting into podcasting. So I basically put together like a 6 episode plan and sent it to my manager, and I was like, look, I've worked out, who we can talk to for 6 episodes. I've looked into software, and we can basically do this without spending any more money. And it's a new way that we can start reaching audiences, and the guests can promote, we can promote, and it just seems like a really like a no-brainer at the time. And she liked the idea.
Because I'm assuming you already had all the equipment. So everything was already locked in. You were just saying, we've already got all the equipment. Let's just use it more than what we are right now.
Yeah, I mean, the expectation during COVID, the podcasting space was a lot more lenient on podcasting. So, like, the way that we're doing it right now, it's virtual, and people were a lot more forgiving of audio quality back in the pandemic because they realized that everyone's working from home. No one's going to be in like a bespoke studio with professional mics. You can do everything you need to do from a laptop, and it meant that we were able to reach architects and interior designers all around the world. We weren't limited to just people who were willing to travel into Twickenham, for example. So yeah, it didn't mean that we would have to do anything wildly extra.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you could essentially test it without having to spend a lot more or spend anything really, because you could
Yeah,
just get a
exactly.
mic, put it on. Yeah, okay, fine, makes sense. And how was that received then? So I'm assuming that your podcast all did fantastically well. You were the rave of Haymarket and off to the races.
Yeah, no, it went really, really well. We were one of the first brands within Haymarket to start doing podcasting, and the audience really loved it. And we started getting people reaching out to us to ask to be on the podcast rather than us having to go out and find people to want to talk to us, and try and convince people to come and join our little podcast. And it went so well that the next year, when we did the Women in Architecture Awards, someone actually wanted to come along as a sponsor because they had heard the podcast and basically said, we'd love to sponsor the awards and also maybe get on the podcast as well. So commercially, it was also quite successful.
And that's helpful, right? If you've got people actually approaching you, how did you ensure that the podcast all, because you're working across so many different topics and verticals, how do you make sure that they stay fresh? Because that's got to be quite a tall order for one person to manage.
Yeah, so I mean, we knew what performed well on our website, what sort of stories. It was all of like the world's biggest tower and a guitar-shaped hotel. We knew that it was the big and the bold and the wacky. So we tried to really find stories that were, or like projects and stuff that we knew the audience would be interested in. So one of the top performing episodes that we did was a residential building that was an all-female design team. And, part of it was that they had considered things that, potentially male designers and architects wouldn't have, including ramps and having a communal creche for kids to play, and having like a room where you can hire out different baking equipment and cooking equipment, and big appliances where you wouldn't necessarily have the space to have it in your place. But every year you might want to bake a cake, so you need a stand mixer, and you can just go down to this room and take it up to your kitchen, use it, and then take it down to this communal room. And there were so many different things that they would consider that don't necessarily always get considered. And another project that we had done was the greenest building, and it was all about how they had basically made like the whole exterior of the building a living wall and was covered in plants, and how well it was going to do for the environment and the air quality for the residents. So we really tried to find like really cool projects. It wasn't just like, oh, this person built a house.
Yeah, makes sense. And I guess having that ability to look through your editorial content allows you that opportunity to then bring it up. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You've essentially taken that leap from words on a page all the way through to audio. And I'm assuming that you incorporate some video in your podcast as well.
At the time, no, we weren't doing video, but what we did was, I don't know if you're familiar with shorthand articles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we would use shorthand articles and embed our podcast into it, and then include pictures of all of the podcasts, all of like the projects that they were talking about. So then you could listen to it, but you would still have that visual element where you get to look at the projects as well.
Okay, is another thing that is less spoken about amongst us Asians, and that's mental health, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I do feel like since the pandemic, mental health has become something that people speak about a lot more. Has that ever shown up in your life as a subject matter?
Yeah, I had a lot of struggles with my mental health when I was a teenager in particular. I didn't really talk about it. I bottled it all up. I didn't deal with it in the best ways. And yeah, I sort of had to try and, as an adult, I've done therapy. When I was younger and a teenager, I really wasn't about it at all. The idea of having to talk to someone about my feelings just made me so uncomfortable. And I got referred to like youth mental health services, and I had to try and talk to someone, and I was just like, oh, you just don't get it. You don't get what it's like to be me. And the one conversation we were having is that I was talking about how I was attracted to women, and it wouldn't go down very well in my family, and it just wouldn't, I wouldn't be able to let my dad know. That's just not something he would ever be okay with. And I remember the woman who was sitting opposite me, she was a white woman, and she said, you just never know. And I was just like, no, I can tell you categorically he would never be okay with it. Well, a dad's love for his daughter. No, I'm telling you, I know for a fact, based on things I've heard him saying, out of the context of me, I know for a fact it wouldn't be okay. Oh, but, he loves you, so he might be okay with it. No, no, he will not be okay with it. I'm telling you that with certainty. I think you should just tell him. I actually don't think it's safe for me to tell him, and I don't think you should be giving me that advice. Well,
That's so strange because you're right. Can you imagine the amount of sort of storms that would have been created
yeah.
out of that level of ignorance from the
Mm-hmm.
therapist? But and my hope is that that's changed, right?
Yeah,
And
but I
it's
think there
not
was just like a cultural divide at the
exactly, it is
time,
a
and she
cultural
just didn't
divide.
understand it.
But fast forward to firstly, how did your dad take it?
He doesn't know.
Oh, he doesn't. Okay, won't be sending this podcast to him. What well, that's an interesting way to live, isn't it? Sorry, that's caught me by surprise. What's your advice to people? Just denial. Just basically, don't tell them. Just let them not know. It's
Well, I think you have to do what is most comfortable and also what is safest for you. If you think that you're not going to get a good reaction from someone, it's your life. You don't need to live for anyone else. If you don't feel comfortable or safe to tell someone, then don't do it. If you're comfortable living with that as your secret, then that's fine. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to not share all of yourself with someone.
I think that's very good advice, actually. I do think that sometimes, especially if we take that to the world of work, so it's, very different dynamic. I do find that there are occasions where I'm sat somewhere talking to a colleague, and all of a sudden I know 100% of their life, and I
Yeah.
find it really strange. It's like, I do feel like that's oversharing,
Hmm.
and not only is it not safe, it's just not appropriate, right? Like
Yeah.
we're work colleagues, we've known each other for 10 minutes. Like maybe hold yourself back a little bit. And there's advice that a manager gave me a while back. In fact, not advice, feedback. So I said to her, I think I know about 40% of you, and she said, I think you're giving me the biggest compliment I've ever received. And the reason being is because she structured it that way. Because for her, this is her work life and this is everything else, and they don't need to bleed into each other. So I
Yeah.
think it's true that not everybody, and that's also true that my parents don't know me 100% for sure. Even if they were to listen to every single one of these episodes, they wouldn't know 100% of me. Why would you give 100% to yourself to anyone other than your partner?
Yeah.
Or maybe a few select friends. All right. Well, moving on. What advice would you give to other people then that were in a similar situation to you, looking to seek therapy or have certain sort of mental health issues? Because I do think that subject matter is still a little bit of a taboo in our cultures or communities, or whatever you want to call it.
I found that it was most helpful doing virtual sessions. I thought the idea of having to actually sit face to face with someone was a bit too confronting for me. So, I mean, most employers now recognize the importance of protecting a person's mental health, and a lot of them will offer some form of employee assistance program. I know that at Haymarket you can get, I think it's up to like 6 sessions covered. And, there's also other platforms like BetterHelp where you can do like phone calls or video calls. And I basically would be on the phone to my therapist and I would go out for a walk along the river because I'm distracting myself with my surroundings where I don't feel as much like, I'm being watched or seen or listened to, and it's kind of just I'm talking out loud and you're able to listen. And my best friend always described me as emotionally constipated because I keep everything in and I don't really share, and I sort of bottle up all of my emotions. So the thing that worked best for me was writing things down, writing down how I feel, pen and paper, not just typing on your phone, because you can't correct yourself as easily pen and paper. You can't just delete a sentence and then rewrite it. When you're writing it pen and paper, you're writing how you feel, you let it flow, and you're not editing yourself as much, as it were. And then taking what I've written, going to the session and sort of going over it and talking about why I've written down all that I have, how it makes me feel, how it made me feel to write it down. Was it catharsis, or was it like actually did it make me close up even more to have to see it and feel it? So I yeah, I found it easiest not doing anything face to face because that's just me, but also you kind of have to try a few different things to work out what is right for you. And also, like, if you go to one session, don't feel like, you know the first therapist you have is never going to be the right one. I learned that the hard way when I was 16 getting really bad advice. So shop around, that's completely fine as well, because at the end of the day the person that you're talking to has to be the right one for you.
I think it's really, really good advice. I think the pen and paper one is fantastic advice, because there is something quite therapeutic just about that connection with the
Mm,
paper that you don't really get when you're typing. I never really thought about doing therapy on the phone while I'm walking around. I've done BetterHelp. I think it's a
mhm,
great platform, but just walking around town talking, or along the river, or what have you, I think that's a great idea, because when I'm walking and talking, I feel a little bit more freer as well, perhaps.
yeah.
Like there is definitely something that there's definitely a positive connection between walking and talking, if you can. And yeah, I'm a coach, and I would say that first session with, it's not the same as therapy, but if I was to liken it to that first session where you're contracting with your new client, or your client is coming in and meeting you, it's definitely important to work out what the chemistry is like, and if
Mhm,
you are a good fit for each other. Because if you're not, then you're wasting each other's time, right? It's like everybody wants to move forward. Me as the coach, I want to support you as an individual and get the best out of the sessions for you. But you, of course, want the same for yourself. And you've got to be brave enough and strong enough to say, no, this isn't the right person for me, either as
Yeah.
the therapist, as the coach, or as the client or individual. So yeah,
Yeah.
good advice. Very good advice. All right. So the speed demon that you are, right?
Hmm.
We met. I was doing some work with the PPA, and from the outside, you look like this very sort of like quiet, timid, shy girl. And then I started talking to you, and I learned that all of those things are wrong, and you are a huge speed demon. Yeah, you're basically an adrenaline junkie. And I
Hmm.
think one of the first sort of casual conversations that we had was you coming back from a a trip to see Formula One somewhere. I can't remember exactly where it was.
Yeah,
Wasn't
Monza.
Monza, that's it, yeah. So that was your opportunity to give me a little bit of insight into Grand Prix, which you do with your two friends. So you mentioned it was Izzy and Reem, right?
Yes.
So yourself and Izzy, correct me if I'm wrong. So yourself and Izzy are basically understand Formula One,
Yeah.
and but Reem probably knows quite a bit about Formula One now. But the concept was you force Reem to watch Formula One, and while she's watching it, and watching each race, you would then give us some insight, and then you'll walk her through it, and then through your conversations on educating her, we were of course learning as well. And it's a
Hmm.
it's a very well structured. I mean, every single episode is really really well structured. Is that essentially the concept?
Yeah, because I mean, Iz and Reem would come and stay at my flat from Friday until Sunday evening.
All right.
And so Saturdays and Sundays, when there are, F1 races, which there are, 24 a year, there's 24 weekends where me and Iz are glued to the TV and Reem sat there on her phone. So last year we decided to do something about it and we were just like, right, get off your phone, stop doom scrolling, and actually learn to love this sport because we love it. And we knew the best way to sort of pitch it to Reem would be to make it as like reality TV show style as possible. Like we're not just going to teach you about strategy and pit stops and tire compounds and regulations. We're also going to tell you all of the drama and all of the gossip and all of the different characters because that's what's going to get her hooked.
And it is very much not quite Drive to Survive, but there is definitely an element of that drama that you bring into the conversation, right? And you also have some fantastic episodes on the history of Formula One, and
Hmm.
and some sort of like specific deep dives into certain regulation. Each episode is really, really well structured. It's really clear that you put in the time to do a lot of research before the episodes. Walk me through the structure of or the process of getting an episode together.
Yeah, so we all have a role to play. I take charge of the edits because that is what I know how to do. Izzy, she's been watching F1 since like 2008, so she is the historian. She does all of the research, she puts together the scripts. She's so creative and she comes up with these really weird and wacky intros. She's also great at impersonation. So for the American Grand Prix, she did like a Trump impersonation for the intro and like she just knows how to make it really, really fun and engaging. And then Reem is obviously the voice of the audience, so she can't do any of the research. She's not allowed to find out before we tell her because we want her organic reactions to things on air. So yeah, while we're doing the research, she doesn't do any of that. She is in charge of socials because, like I said, she's chronically online, and she was working for a performance marketing brand, and she's a bit more social media savvy than we are. So she's in charge of all of our social strategy and making sure that we're getting posts, engaging. So we all have a role to play.
And then the script that you have, because you have an element of script and non-scripted components. So who
Hmm.
puts the script together?
That's Izzy. Yeah.
That's easy. Okay, right, great. Those on occasion are really, really just phenomenally well written. So I do urge people to have a look. And then who does all the artwork? Because your artwork on your podcast covers are your thumbnails are brilliant as well.
Yeah, so I designed the artwork at like 2 a.m. one day, and that was a lot. Yeah, I don't normally do artwork, but I was kind of like, okay, well, we have no budget, so let's just try and do it. So I stayed up until like 2 a.m. I was playing around with Photoshop, and I like sent it over to the girls, and I was like, what do we think? And they were just like, yes, yes, we love it. So then each episode we kind of adapt it a bit and try to make it apply to the country that we're in.
I think it looks great. I think it might be, one of the reasons to watch it is the artwork. I mean, if you think about it from a library perspective, you've got all these options on different Formula One content, and you see that one, they do stand out, and you change it for almost every single episode.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Maybe something that I need to do. So, and I can see that there's some inspiration from the artwork behind you in terms of the colours.
Yeah, we went for very colourful artwork, and we have day artwork and night artwork because obviously some of the races take place at night time. So whenever it's a night race, we go for dark blues, and yeah, we need to. We're changing artwork for the second season as well, so just to have a slightly different look. So I have to do that this weekend because the next season is coming up.
And how does Reem feel about how she's been portrayed in the episodes? Because she's like a very sweet person who hasn't watched Formula One before. Yeah, I have to say that her recall on the insight and the knowledge is picked up. She understands the sport really well now. But there are on occasions where, of course, she'll say something that's a little bit right,
Yeah.
and you leave it in. Like you don't even do your friend a favor. You just leave that moment in. How does she feel about that?
Well, I mean, in the trailer and in the first few episodes, we sort of she introduces herself as the person that asks the stupid questions that no one else would dare to ask. So after the first race of the 2025 season, when she asked how often are the wet races, and we had to say to her, as often as it rains. What do you think? They schedule a certain amount of races to be wet? We can't control global warming. Why would you ask that as a question? It's we want it to be funny. We don't want people to feel like, they are not welcome to ask their own questions. Like we get a lot of messages from our audience who are writing in to say like, I've tried getting into Formula One for years and it's so nice to have sort of you guys to listen to because I'm learning so much, but I also feel like, Reem is asking all the exact questions that I would ask that I would also feel too ashamed to ask. And it's quite nice knowing that it is resonating with people as well. Like when you look at other F1 podcasts that exist, most of the hosts are white men. So and they also they're from the industry, they are commentators and they are reporters that are specifically in the F1 space, and so they talk about it with an assumed knowledge for the audience. Whereas if you're trying to get into the sport, which Drive to Survive has done a wonderful job at getting younger audiences in, more female audiences in, and there's not really a place for them to learn and to properly learn as well, not have to listen to something and go off on their own to Google it. Whereas we're kind of taking you from the very beginning of you've never watched a race before all the way to I now understand the whole 2025 season and I feel well equipped to go into the next season knowing that you're going to teach me about these new regulations and what they mean and all of that.
I do like it as well from the perspective that you can just dip in on any episode. So if you've missed an episode, it's fine. It's not like so it's great from that perspective. And you're right. I think that she plays a really really solid important role because the reality is I'm not a Formula One aficionado or geek, right? Like it's a sport that is one of the sports that I like, but I'm perhaps not as vested in it as yourself and Izzy. So she does on occasion ask questions that I wouldn't ask the wet racist question, but there are some questions here for sure, and I do think that the dynamic and the chemistry between you three is fantastic. There are occasions where your introduction is about 5 minutes long and nothing to do with Formula One,
Yeah.
And those are on occasion the most entertaining parts of the episode, right? Like that's completely non-Formula One related. It's just three friends catching up, having a laugh, and I get to be a fly on the wall of that. Oh, and now we're going to go into a bit of Formula One.
Yeah, I think a lot of the other Formula One podcasts, I think where Formula One is seen as this like really technical sport, they all take themselves a bit too seriously. Like at the end of the day, we are just friends that really love a sport and we're trying to teach our other friend about it. Like we're still going to have our normal friendship dynamic and we want our listeners to feel like they're part of it as well. And we're kind of, building a community of Grand Prix.
Of course, yes, and that's the T-shirt that I want to wear. So, what what happened? Because when you and I first spoke about your podcast, it was quite a hush hush project. So I understood that Haymarket knew about it, but it wasn't something that you wanted to talk about on this podcast or speak about openly. And then, of course, there was this momentous occasion that's happened recently, which we
Mhm.
can talk about. But was that the catalyst? Was what happened?
Yeah, I mean, it was all very new. And, we only put out our first episode, March 2025. And so we were still growing. We were still making sure that, it was a feasible thing that we could continue to do. And, it wasn't taking up too much of our lives. And then in June 2025, we saw the entries were open for the Independent Podcast Awards. And we'd only been up and running for 4 months. And I said to the girls, I was just like, we should enter. And they were just like, we've only been running for 4 months. Why would we do that? And I was like, because why not? Like, what's the worst that happens? We don't get anything. Like, okay, cool. It's not that big of a deal. But if we put ourselves forward and, if we get shortlisted, we might be able to get feedback and we might be able to see what it is they like, what it is they don't like. And it could give us a gauge of how we can improve going forward. And so we put together our entry and I got an email one day from the Independent Podcast Awards. I didn't look at it and I got on a video call with the girls and I said, I've got an email. It says the shortlist is out. So I got up the page on my laptop and I was showing them the screen or with my phone. I was scrolling down to the sport podcast section and Grand Prix was there and we'd been shortlisted and we all screamed. And we were so excited because we were just like to be shortlisted after having been podcasting for 4 months. It felt incredible. And it felt like really, really good recognition for us. And then we went along to the awards in October and, we cheered the loudest when our name was called, when they were going through the shortlist. And we didn't win, but we were highly commended. And that felt incredible because our entry, like I said, we submitted it after 4 months. And it was a nice bit of validation that we were creating something that was good and that deserved to be highlighted and deserved to be championed. And, next year we'll be deserving of winning a prize. And it felt okay to us that we didn't win because a female football podcast won. So we were just like, okay, it went to another woman. Another woman has won the sport category. That's fine. We'll allow it. But yeah, after that point, it was kind of like, yeah, we should shout about this and we should talk about it and we should be really, really proud of what we're creating because obviously, podcast industry experts think it's good enough.
Yeah, I think firstly, congratulations. That's brilliant. That's absolutely phenomenal. And there's a lot of competition in that space.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's phenomenal. And female football is also great. It's a great podcast series. So you've lost out to a great series. Does it really matter that it was another set of women that you lost to? Why is that important?
Oh, because I think you think of sports and you think it's, a male dominated space, and it's quite nice that, women's football is getting the flowers that it deserves and it's getting all the attention it deserves. So, I think it's nice that there's no longer this sort of thing where the sport is a men's domain and you don't get involved. And I mean that is some like we've had an occasion with our podcast where we had a social clip that went quite viral, and for the most part people were supportive, but where it got a lot more reach there were also some pretty nasty people that then also saw it and would start commenting things like, oh, this is a knitting party. This is what happens when women start talking about Formula One. And it just made us think, like, oh gosh, we have our little tight knit community and it's so nice. But then as soon as we, put something out that gets further reach, suddenly the floodgates open for people to try and be nasty. And it kind of that, I mean, it was a bit of a knock to us because we were just like, why are people so nasty online? So then knowing that actually, as female podcasters in the sports space, particularly the motorsport space, which doesn't have very many women involved in it, being able to take on a sport category at a podcast awards was quite momentous for us.
I can understand that. I can absolutely 100% see that. And I can imagine how that feedback would have knocked you a little bit, because the reality is that it is a great podcast. It's a great podcast, great content, great dynamic. Might not be the right bit of content for everybody, but no one's forcing them to listen either.
Yeah.
So they can do whatever they want to do. What would your advice be to someone who was thinking about setting up a podcast? What would you say to them?
I would say make sure that you have the time to do it, because it is a commitment and it is a lot of work, but it's also very, very fun and very rewarding. I would say that if you're going to do it, try and stick to it. Pod fade is a very real thing, and most podcasters sort of slip off at around episode 7. So if you can get past episode 7, you're onto a good thing. We're coming up to episode 50 on Grand Prix, so we're doing quite well to get past that pod fade, and we're changing up the format a bit. We've been working on like a documentary series so that we didn't get too bored with the content we were making. Yeah, you have to enjoy it yourself, because it will come through in the audio if you're not enjoying yourself. So make sure you're enjoying making it, and your audience will in turn enjoy listening to it.
I think that's brilliant advice. Absolutely brilliant advice. Okay, so you know that the closing tradition for me is that you name the podcast. So what are you naming this episode?
Oh gosh. I never know what we're going to talk about, so I don't have time to prepare. What should I name it? Is it bad if I plug my podcast? Be a Grand Prick.
Let's go for it.
Okay.
I'm cool with that. I'm absolutely cool with that. I'm absolutely fine with signposting a fantastic podcast that is Grand Prix. And also, thank you so much, Nav, for being a fabulous guest today on this episode of Leadership in Colour.
Thank you for being a fabulous host.